We now continue Accessory. The prior day, the morning before Faith had ever gained opportunity to meet a man whose name she wouldn't learn, Ray boarded a train. She owned a crop duster, an old World War biplane converted over to civilian use, and although there wasn't anything for her to dust in town right now, the law still required her to fly every now and then to keep her license. She lived in Ponyville, but unfortunately the nearest place that she could take care of her baby was the downtown airport in the capital. It was 2 hours away by train, but Ray would have done anything for that plane. She once gone a whole month without buying her own food so she could pay for the rent for it. She had a laundry list of favors she owed to half the people around Ponyville, and when there weren't dusting jobs available, there commonly weren't, she painted houses, mowed lawns, or went door to door begging for anything that could make ends meet. The bottom line was it was a losing investment any day of the week, but Ray wouldn't give it up if someone tried to pry her fingers off. Ray picked out a window seat and plopped down in it. She popped in her headphones and put her MP3 player on shuffle, then rested her head in the corner between the window and her seat. She closed her eyes and started dozing. She'd sleep the rest of the way to Ponyville, or past it. Sometimes the reality didn't fit the ideal, but if she missed her stop, Ray could get on a bus and sleep again until it passed Ponyville going the other way. Granted, it was not always a functional system, but Ray got home eventually. She felt the shadow of someone next to her. Ray growled internally. There were plenty of other seats around. Why'd this person decide they need to sit next to Ray? Were they lonely? Ray hoped they were thin enough that they wouldn't invade her bubble any worse than they already had. Whoever it was, Ray was going to spend the entire trip ignoring this person so hard. So of course the person tapped Ray on the arm. Ray propped her head out of the wedge she'd stuffed it in, glaring at the other passenger with very poorly veiled annoyance. It was some guy in a casual business suit. He had a book, and one leg was crossed over the other, his shine black shoes telling the world he had more money than it did. The next thing Ray noticed was the scent he was wearing. Ray didn't really know the difference between cheap cologne and good cologne, but she was willing to classify it as sleazy cologne on a guy like this. "Excuse me," the guy asked. "Are you from Ponyville?" Ray's eyes narrowed. What about her screamed rinky-dink Ponyville to him? Yeah, sure, she was from Ponyville, but she didn't exactly go shopping for new clothes very often. But it's not like he could tell that just from looking. Probably. Ray pulled one earbud loose. "I was just asking if you were from Ponyville," the guy repeated. "Yeah," Ray replied, nodding, casting some disdain in his direction. "Sorry," he said. "I just thought you looked like a pretty young country girl." Ray rolled her eyes. With a groaning sigh, she frumped back to her space against the window. Just what she needed. She had this guy's number. He was some douchebag with his cute little seat on the company board that made him so charming. Sure, he'd just use his manly voice at Ray and she'd throw her pretty country girl panties right off. And after that great idea, maybe he could rake in $100 million severance package by bankrupting his whole company. Freaking idiot. The person chuckled. He tapped Ray lightly on the arm with his backhand, changing Ray's expression from vague annoyance to an uncooperative scowl. "Hey, listen," he asserted. "I'm asking because I was curious if you knew a Tabitha Saunders there." Ray glanced over her shoulder at the book the guy was holding. Sure enough, the name Tabitha Saunders was written on the spine. Tabitha was a friend of Ray's, but this guy was not. "Why?" "I'm a fan of her work, and I heard Ponyville's a small town," the guy explained. Okay, maybe he wasn't exactly the manly type that thought he'd talk any panties off. Tabitha Saunders wrote a lot of romance novels, most of which were decidedly pretty feminine. They were also very detailed, as best Ray could describe it, usually from the female perspective. Her books were girly. "All she ever writes is that washy stuff," Ray complained. The man glanced down at his book in appraisal. "It's not washy," he decided, like he'd given it consideration for the first time. Yeah, it is," Ray insisted, nodding in vehement support of her opinion. The guy cocked an eyebrow. It was a clear challenge. Ray couldn't just leave it. "Because all she ever writes about is love and romance and stuff," she demanded. The train lurched as it began to leave the station, causing the two to bob before rolling back to their original positions. The guy opened his book and flipped through a few pages, holding an open palm towards it. He went on calmly staring Ray down with an incredulous disbelief. "Well, a lot of it is based on historical events, and you know Tabitha does a lot of research on..." "Tabitha does a lot of research on dead people fucking each other," Ray interjected, flapping her hand open and closed in front of the guy's face. He could just stop yapping now. Ray knew Tabitha personally. If Ray said Tabitha's books were stupid, then they were probably stupid. The other passenger laughed out loud. "Dead people fucking each other?" he exclaimed, combinations of delight and horror. "Is that what you call it?" The train was picking up speed. It was headed on down the tracks to home. "Yeah," Ray insisted. The guy laughed again. It was friendly, but Ray felt a buzz of anger wash through her body. What was he laughing at? Ray? "So what exactly is washy about the living dead wanting to fuck one another?" he asked. Ray rolled her eyes and huffed. "Come on, guy, get a life." "Shut up," Ray gawled. "You can't even argue that your book isn't full of girly love and shit, and you're a girl for reading it." The man across from her just went on laughing, throwing his head into his hands as he did so. It was a deep, hearty laugh, like he was really enjoying it. Ray found herself cracking a grin along with him, even though she was pretty sure he was still a jerk. "Oh, Mr. Darcy," Ray illustrated through her nose, clasping her hands together against her chin. "Buy me a horse," she concluded, unable to think of a more girly request on short notice. Seriously, was that the kind of stuff this guy was into? What was the word for a guy like that? A fop? "That's Jane Austen," the man exasperated, throwing his arms out in protest. "Total fop." "Same difference," Ray argued, copying his expansive gesture. "No, Jane Austen is terrible," the man said, pointing to Ray. "Tabitha's all right." That was hard to argue with. It wasn't Tabitha's writing, just Tabitha that was all right. And Tabitha was pretty all right. She's okay," Ray conceded, waving a hand in the air. She put her head back against the window. Maybe this guy wasn't that bad, but she had to at least try ignoring him. She wouldn't be cool if she wasn't naturally aloof, even if that natural aloofness was partly artificial. "Are bomber jackets popular in Ponyville?" the guy asked after Ray situated herself. Ray's jacket was getting worn at the elbows, and it had a few stains in the fur of the collar. She wore the old thing specifically because it was a genuine Air Force jacket. She'd bought it at a thrift store for cheap, but it was what the jacket said that was important. "I fly planes," Ray responded proudly. Not that he'd understand. "No kidding," the guy replied, impressed. "Do you do private charter or something?" Ray shook her head, rubbing her hair into the glass pane. "Nah," she said. "Just a little biplane." "Enthusiast?" he asked. "I'm in the aerial application business," Ray said smoothly, tossing the more professional term out there. "Crop duster?" the guy guessed after mulling it over for a second. "Nope," Ray corrected, disappointed he'd figured it out. "Crop dusting is what my grandpa would have done. Aerial application is way more sophisticated." If Ray could do anything, it was talk something up. She really did know her way around crop dusting, though. She'd paid for classes on proper pesticide use and a bunch of other necessary things. It wasn't something a person just did randomly. "You know, I've always loved planes," the guy admitted thoughtfully. "Are they really strict about how you can fly that thing, or do you have some freedom with it?" That got her, and once Ray revved her engines, she couldn't stop. She spilled everything she knew about aviation and crop dusting, the systems and modifications the plane went through, how she took care of her own plane, the tricks she could pull off in her own little baby. Every time she started to slow down, the guy would ask another question or add a comment, and Ray would recharge. What she really wanted to do was fly fighter planes, she told him, and then she told him everything she knew about fighters. It was at least an hour before Ray simultaneously ran out of ideas and got sick of her own voice. Once the conversation wound down, her new friend took his book, and Ray watched for cows outside, high in her own world of flight. Okay, this guy was cool, suit or not. Apparently some people still got up in the world by being interested in the right stuff. She pictured him as a sort of entrepreneur who went around trying to turn ideas into profit, but maybe he sucked at it. "So you really like those books, huh?" Ray asked. "Well, sure," he agreed. "I like seeing if I can recognize the author's inspirations." Ray never had the patience for Tabitha's books, but this guy seemed a little on the quiet side. Probably something he learned, as clumsy as he was with introductions. Ray knew for sure that Tabitha was a huge dork in person, so maybe they were both a couple of great big dorks. Not that it was always a bad thing. "I'm actually really close friends with her," Ray said. "That's how I know her books are for total nerds, because she's a total nerd." This time her friend rolled his eyes. "Well," he started, "do you think you could get a total nerd to sign her book for another total nerd?" Ray shrugged. It was good that he was honest about being a nerd. Sometimes it pissed Tabitha off. "You could probably just ask her yourself. I'll give you directions to where she lives," Ray suggested. "Then you guys can talk about magic cards or whatever." Her friend smirked and rubbed the brim of his forehead. "Thanks," he replied. "That's not going to make a bad impression, just knocking on her door, is it?" "Nah," Ray assured him. "Just tell her Ray said you're cool. That'll get you in." Her friend snorted, but thanked her again. Ray gave him an address and the best directions she could manage, which mainly included a lot of vague landmarks that he could turn left or right at, both directions at once, depending on whether or not Ray could remember. Afterward, she fell asleep. She awoke in Ponyville when her new friend gripped her on the shoulder. He grabbed his suitcase and left the train, offering a smile and a goodbye on the way out. AJ was covered from finger to forearm in a thin layer of grease. Another patch was spread across her forehead where she'd wiped the perspiration off her brow. The defeated remnants of a mower deck lay out in front of her. The stupid thing was cutting in steeped patterns, and she'd taken it apart in the assumption that it would be a quick fix. Sure enough, she'd checked everything, and it was the mower's spindle that was messed up. It was always the most inconvenient damn thing. Except, it wasn't, really. AJ was just tired. She was up too early and in bed too late every night. She sighed and surveyed the vanquished machinery. She'd need to swing by the store later today to see if she could find a replacement part. Until then, she just had to decide whether she would leave the mower deck in shambles or should she put it back together. A part of her gave a mental lashing for even thinking that. She was going to have to put it back together or she'd lose parts. "Hey, AJ," came a chipper voice from the entrance of the barn. It tap-danced the line between friendly and obnoxious. It was Pepper. She was leaning over the lower section of the barn door, bright-eyed and cheery. AJ's heart crossed its arms and glared daggers at the girl. There wasn't time to play around. Her mind, however, gave her heart a good shove. Pepper owned the land the farm was built on, and if she wanted to run around here, she had the right. Besides, Pepper was a nice girl, and she wouldn't be hanging around if she knew she was in the way. "Hey, girlie," AJ replied, rubbing her face against her shoulder. "That a new shirt?" she asked, pointing to the bright red tee her friend was wearing. "You betcha," Pepper chirped, neither her seconds spared nor her gleaming eyes on AJ's face. "How did you know?" Pepper bounced and fidgeted as she spoke. It blew AJ's mind knowing somebody with so much pent-up energy. It had to be bad for Pepper somehow, but only medical science knew how. "It just looks like the thing hasn't been through the wash yet," AJ answered, vaguely waving a screwdriver. AJ's brother Mac walked into view behind Pepper. The door hinges were on the right side, which meant he needed to open the thing from the left. Instead, he stopped closer to the hinges, behind Pepper, and reached out his arm around without touching her. "Excuse me," he said softly, nodding politely to Pepper as he shared space with her. "Real smooth, Mac," AJ cringed. Pepper squeaked, hopping up on the door frame so Mac could swing her and the door aside together. Once inside, he swung the door shut again, briefly bringing himself face to face with the bubbly, curl-topped redhead, sharing space again. "Hello, Mr. Big Maxwell Smith," Pepper greeted with a hint of mock Southern. Mac set a propane tank down in the corner of the barn with his back and arms more posed than brains. "Lift with your legs, Mac," glowered AJ. She was giving him a reproving look, but she knew he wasn't going to notice. "Hello, Mrs. Pepper," Mac replied. He strutted over to the doorway, leaning next to Pepper. "How are you doing?" Pepper asked, resting on a hand. Pepper looked on a hair trigger for giggles, either for Mac, or probably because she knew AJ had trouble written all over her and was going to drop it on her brother any second now. Mac leaned down into Pepper's space for a third time, putting his own head on his fist, which required Pepper to wiggle aside for him. AJ wished they'd start making out there on the barn door and get it over with so she could spray them with the garden hose. All this looking into each other's eyes and flirtation was just wasting time anyway. AJ took off her hat and booted over to the two of them. She cocked the Stetson back and, with a flick of the wrist, snapped into their space. Pepper reared out of the door, narrowly missing a swat. But the startled look on Mac's face was priceless, like he'd been caught stealing cookies. "Hey there, Mr. Big Maxwell Smith," AJ deviled, pinching him. "Hey," Mac protested, leaping away from his sister. He tried to grab her hand, but AJ was like a snake. "I hear there's a big Maxwell Smith hole in the deer fence that needs some big Maxwell Smith fixin'," AJ picked, chasing Mac to the wall of the barn. Mac was asking for it. He should have known better than to slack off, chasing some girl right in front of AJ when they both knew he should be working. "Why don't you go fix that hole, Mr. Big Maxwell Smith?" AJ carried on. Mac held his arms out defensively, putting his shorter sister at bay. By and large, both Smith siblings were built taller and tougher than most. They'd had a big father, and they ate well, but Mac still had a good advantage over her. "All right," he submitted defensively. AJ relented and made a path to the door. Mac brought himself back up to his full height and attempted to pass by her as nonchalantly as possible, probably trying to save some dignity in front of Pepper. AJ pinched him again once he had his back exposed, just to remind him who was boss, causing Mac to half skip and swat back at her, grunting in heckled frustration. He swung Pepper and the barn door aside and tromped outdoors. "Bye-bye, Mr. Big Maxwell," Pepper teased after him. Mac nodded, but did his best to maintain polite indifference. Probably the better choice. It would have been embarrassing to try to swoon a girl after a display like that. AJ gently but deliberately shoved Pepper off the door, accidentally wiping mower grease on Pepper's new shirt in the process. Pepper didn't seem to notice. AJ stepped outside and eyeballed her brother. When he shot a glance over his shoulder, she waved him a firmly dismissive goodbye. Pepper hugged AJ from behind as the farm girl waved, putting her head beneath AJ's extended arm. When Mac left earshot, AJ put Pepper in a friendly headlock. "So what exactly brings Miss Pepper to the farm?" AJ demanded her old compatriot. "Aside from hormones." Pepper bit AJ's waist, hard. "Ow!" AJ exclaimed, shoving Pepper away angrily, smearing grease all over the other girl's face. That was just plain dirty. Pepper could have grabbed AJ by the legs or slapped her in the face or something, but biting was totally unfair. AJ lifted up her shirt to check for a mark. "Sheesh, girl," AJ groused, icing over to defuse the situation before Pepper attacked again. "That hurt." "Sorry," Pepper conceded, searching AJ concernedly for any wounds. Pepper gave her friend a loving squeeze, making sure she healed up any emotional injuries to cover bases. "I'm fine," whined AJ. "I know. I just like hugs," Pepper spouted. AJ's arms were pinned, so she waited for Pepper to get her worth out of the hug. As much as it always grated on AJ's nerves to see her, Pepper sure was a nice girl. You just couldn't argue with someone who directed her every last drop of energy to making certain you were happy. "So, what can the Smiths do you for?" AJ tried again when Pepper let go. "Oh, Mac doesn't have to pay me anything," Pepper responded, grinning like an imp. AJ chuckled her hat into Pepper's mischievous face. That was about all she had to say about that. Pepper caught it on the rebound and handed it back. "What do you even see in my brother?" AJ asked. "He's big," Pepper replied sheepishly. AJ rolled her eyes. "And he's Maxwell," Pepper expanded, the grin creeping back into her face. AJ cupped her hand over Pepper's mouth. "Nuh-uh," she demanded. "Whatever you're thinking about doing with him," AJ caught sight of Pepper's innocent eyes. "Whatever y'all are already doing with him, that's a Pepper secret, okay? If I hear about it, I'll kill the both of you." Pepper nodded. AJ let go of her face, leaving behind a second grease handprint. If Pepper and Mac were going to do any bonding emotionally, then it was damn well going to be without AJ ever having to think of it. "Sorry about your new shirt," AJ noticed, pointing out the fresh grease stain. "Huh?" Pepper asked, just now catching wind of the fact. "Oh, it's no problem." Pepper peeled her shirt off. AJ's mouth dropped open. She hadn't thought they made bras that size with little cartoony characters all over them. AJ had no idea what it said about her friend. Did she special order that stuff? Seemed like a lot of work just to have Spider-Man and Mickey Mouse supporting your business. Pepper turned her shirt inside out and put it back on. "What on earth?" "What? It's just inside out," Pepper said, oblivious. "Maybe I ought to yank the tag off." AJ tried to consider how she might begin such a conversation. "So I see you only trust Spider-Man to uphold." "Nope." "Gee, I bet that would be a PR disaster if they knew Mickey Mouse." Well, that had potential. Probably not enough, though. How to ask without being totally weird about it? Hell with it. Why not be blunt about it? Unfortunately, AJ didn't get the chance. The front door of the house slammed open, releasing a wild Granny Smith out onto the world in all her finely aged farm-booted glory. AJ didn't know if she was rough with the doors on purpose, or if it was a built-in mechanism for an elderly woman in charge. When AJ had been a teenager, it had certainly been the most horrific part of her life. One young boy had been so alarmed he actually leapt, half-naked, out onto the Smith roof and ran home for his life. He told all his friends that Granny had seen the entire thing and was wielding a shotgun, when in fact the old woman had eyes so bad she didn't realize she'd intruded on youthful exploration until 2 months later, when word of her murdering, protective attitude finally circulated around town and caught up with her ears. Granny had, in fact, been wielding a shotgun at the time, but not for the reasons the boy believed. Try getting a date after that. Following just a ways behind Granny was a man in a suit, roughly AJ's age, handsome too, who was flanked by the family collie, Winona, and the family's sweethearted ray of sunshine, Abigail, who was only sweethearted when she wasn't raining well-intentioned destruction across town. "Where the heck is your brother?" Granny demanded obstinately as she plodded up the hill. "He's fixing a hole," AJ said. "Well, tell him to get out here and say hi to our guest," Granny ordered in the obliviousness of old age. When she got up close enough to notice AJ's company was, in fact, not a brightly colored tree sapling so much as a brightly colored human girl, Pepper sprang into action. "Hi, Granny Smith," Pepper exclaimed, hugging Granny off her feet like the two were loving family. "Oh, well, hello there, Pepper," Granny replied, returning a blind hug while she stumbled for balance. The two separated. "Is that grandson of mine married to you yet?" Granny asked. "Granny," AJ scolded. "I think Mac would tell you if he was planning on—" "Well, maybe I forgot," Granny Smith snapped. "I'm old. I can't remember what I even did this morning, much less y'all getting married and whatnot." She mumbled something about husbandry and the darn livestock. Granny's entourage was still waiting obediently behind her. "It's okay. Mac doesn't have to." "He don't have a choice in the matter," Granny declared, waving her cane about in the air. "When you're ready to marry that boy, you just give me the word, Pepper, and that boy's getting married." She muttered to herself again, this time about young people and having no sense. AJ met eyes with the stranger behind Granny. He was looking kindly at her. A bit imploringly? Something a bit different than that. A bit more with the quality of a razor blade. AJ suddenly wished she'd been expecting company. She was not dressed to meet a strange man. Well, normally she was dressed to meet whomever she damn well pleased. But right now she wasn't dressed to meet a keenly suited man who was looking directly into her eyes and not anywhere near her clothing. "Okay," Pepper responded, mirroring Granny's determination. AJ pulled herself away. She meant to ask Granny who the gentleman was, but had suddenly caught a tennis ball in her throat. Winona was running back and forth alongside him, tugging at his attention. Guy must have scratched behind Winona's ears earlier. A person thinks dogs are loyal animals, but ear scratching is all they're loyal to. "Who's this?" Pepper asked, pointing at the man. "Who's what?" Granny asked, late for a nap. "This," Pepper reiterated, grabbing the man by the arm and pulling him towards her. The man didn't seem terribly put off by Pepper's sudden outburst of physical contact. Quite the contrary. He put a hand at the small of her back as he opened his mouth to reply, but too late. "Oh, him?" Granny said, squinting. "He's here to marry AJ." Abigail and Pepper gasped. AJ threw her hands over her face and turned beet red. It appeared to come as a shock to their guest, too. Granny slipped off into dreamland while still standing. "Damn it, Granny." "Oh my gosh!" Pepper thrilled, pressurized excitement nearly bursting. "Really?" Now AJ remembered. She'd been told a patron would be staying here while he did business in Ponyville. Damn it, Granny, damn it. A simple introduction. How hard was that to screw up? This is Mr. Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell, not a wedding partner. Pepper would be scampering all over town telling everybody. "This is Mr. Caldwell," AJ proclaimed, grappling to regain some sanity and fighting the redness in her face down to normal levels. "You're so cute together," Pepper encouraged, pushing Mr. Caldwell, who was catching the contagion of Pepper's enthusiasm, next to AJ. "Can you please kiss for me? Please kiss." Pepper clasped her hands together. Abigail had both hands over her mouth, turning as red as AJ had been. Mr. Caldwell looked AJ deeply in the eyes and took her by her greasy hand. Pepper clapped. This was exactly what she wanted. AJ was prepared to apologize on behalf of Granny, but the switch master in her mind was suddenly pulling her hair out, trying to figure out which track the train was on. This was the most flustering introduction of her life. Mr. Caldwell kissed AJ on the arm, just above the grease. Abigail stifled a giggle. "No, a real kiss," Pepper insisted. "I don't know about you, but I seem to have lucked out," Mr. Caldwell said serenely, a thinly bemused smile curling about his lips. He was still piercing into AJ. "It's a pleasure to meet you." AJ didn't know what to do next. Slap him? Deny everything? He was just playing along with the moment. "Yeah," AJ managed, feeling her face growing hot again, burning around her freckles. "Wow, you looking sunburnt awful fast, sis," Abigail narrated, laughing. After a few seconds of breathing, AJ regained enough composure to work with all of this. "So's you know, I don't do the laundry, cooking, or cleaning," she said, scrabbling at the momentum of her usual authority. "I figure a man who's bigger and stronger can stand to do all the hard work and still save time." "Well, maybe not that lucky," Mr. Caldwell resigned, shaking AJ's hand as if she were a business partner now. "And I get to handle the money," AJ finished directly. "Then again," Mr. Caldwell said slowly, considerately, "maybe a little luckier than I realized." He'd told her this with a certain kind of distant respect, like he'd just realized he'd met a competitor. AJ smiled. A man who knew his place. Now there was something you didn't see every day. "Aw, AJ, that ain't no way to treat a husband," Abigail protested from the peanut gallery. "Shush up," AJ scolded. "You can decide how you'll run yours when you've got one." "Okay, kiss now," Pepper begged. Mr. Caldwell waggled an eyebrow. "Not on your life, buddy," AJ replied with her own. The way he bore down on her with that look, though, it was awfully hard to stay stern about it. He was still holding AJ's hand delicately, and his hand was soft. He smelled nice. "Kiss," Abigail encouraged with a little confidence, joining Pepper. "Do it," Pepper pleaded, jostling AJ by the arm. Mr. Caldwell just kept staring AJ down for a cue. Winona barked and jumped, understanding excitement but not much else. AJ had started playing the game, but now she wondered if it wasn't all going to be a bit past crimeless fun. Still, she wasn't one to give in to peer pressure. "Now I've got conditions," AJ proposed, stalling to get a grasp on where this was all headed. Aw, AJ, Pepper whined. Yeah, Abigail insisted along, motivated by her young perception of how romance was supposed to go. Granny Smith snorted awake. Huh? This is Marion Caldwell, she recovered, shaking her cane vaguely where Marion had been, as if she'd never missed a beat. She glanced around, taking in the blur of her surroundings, only then realizing that AJ and Marion were holding hands together. She'd clearly interrupted some kind of moment, whatever it may have been. Goodness, Granny said. How long was I out? I don't know, somewhere in there involving marriage, AJ replied, purposely vague, realizing now just how wide a smirk she was wearing. Marriage? Shrieked an outraged Granny Smith. Why hadn't she been informed? She was Granny Smith, for goodness sake. She had to be informed before a Smith in her house got married, especially a Miss Smith. Marion began to look a bit confused, worried even, facing the blustering onslaught of Hurricane Granny. He was playing this game by Smith rules now, on Smith soil, and Smith rules favored the Smiths, especially if you didn't know the Smiths that well. He released AJ, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket, and did his best to wipe the grease from his hand. He didn't want to play now, did he? Well, we have to, on account of the baby, AJ said woodenly, matching Marion from the corner of her eye. She'd never been good at acting. Granny Smith knit her brows and glared at the two of them. AJ knew Granny was waiting for AJ either to come clean or start babbling a lot of incriminating denial. Look, I don't... Marion faltered, shaking his hands. Darling, AJ fretted, more transparent than a soap opera as she clutched Marion by the hand, dirtying it once more. I think it's time we came clean about... AJ doubled forward as Granny's cane propelled itself right into her gut. AJ's pregnant? Cried a wide-eyed Abigail. No, you ain't, Granny accused, as if her say were the final matter on whether or not AJ was telling the truth. Granny ambled over to them and took Mr. Caldwell's handkerchief from his grip. She held his hand out and dabbed at the cloth with her tongue. I'm sorry about my granddaughter giving you trouble, Mr. Caldwell, she said, wiping off the muck of his digits. You know how she gets. AJ was quite sure he didn't know how she got, as this was the first time she'd ever pretended to be pregnant with a stranger's baby, to horrify Granny or otherwise. She also did not like Granny insinuating to strangers that everybody should just know how AJ got. AJ got angry, is what she was going to get. It's all right, Marion replied, bouncing a look off AJ. I started it. She was ending it. We were just funnin', AJ grumbled, rubbing the sore spot above her navel. Originally it was going to be an I, but we was better. If it was we, then AJ was dragging someone else down with her. This is kind of like that time we went to that fancy garden party and you kept asking why nobody was gardening, Pepper reminded everyone. That had been the worst party for AJ. She'd started with that joke, and when nobody laughed, she tried to explain it. And when that didn't work, she just kept going with it, doing her best not to look stupid. Pretty soon, she dug up some weeds and was trying to explain that this was gardening. Nobody had laughed, especially not AJ, who was screaming in mental agony the entire time. AJ eyed Mr. Caldwell, whose handkerchief was being pocketed and stolen by Granny now. It was probably about time for AJ to get back to work, before things got any more awkward in front of him. Except if she did that, Pepper was now going to think of a million stories she could tell about stupid things AJ had done in public. I thought it was pretty funny, Pepper added, but only because I knew enough context at the time. I think if maybe Granny Smith hadn't jabbed you then, your whole pregnancy joke would be going to enter a horrible death spiral that would only be funny enough with context. And only to other people. So y'all aren't getting married? Inquired Abigail. If she wants to get married so much, I think she ought to do all the cooking tonight like a good wife, Granny Smith decided. Hey, AJ protested in vain. That ain't fair, it's Mac's turn. Well, Mac ain't running around faking pregnancies, Granny snapped. Only 'cause he can't, argued AJ ineffectually. Excuse me, Marion interrupted. Ladies, I was hoping I might get a chance to look around town before the evening. I also don't think it would go amiss to get out of here before I cause any more trouble. Oh, it's no trouble at all, dearie, Granny insisted, patting Marion on the knuckles. Everyone's in trouble, countermanded AJ fiercely. Have y'all seen my cooking? I hope y'all like tacos. Burnt. Tacos again? Abigail whined. Can't we just order pizza? I'll show you around, jumped Pepper to the rescue. She grabbed Marion around the arm and pulled him away from the bickering Smiths. Down the hill they went, towards town, with Pepper jovially waving goodbye over her shoulder. Pepper was a nice girl, but where she found the energy, AJ just didn't know.